All right, let's go ahead and get started. We'd like to welcome everyone to part three of our webinar series, Act for Impact, Closing the Loop and Proving ROI. We're excited to have many of you who have joined us from our previous webinar sessions and are thrilled to finish this one off. Obviously, we've talked about listening, collecting that data. Once we have that data, how do we analyze it and really enriching that with some of the AI-driven features that Qualtrics has released. But ultimately, we know it all comes down to taking action on those insights. So that's what we really want to focus on today. We do want to acknowledge, similar to last time, some of the functionality that we'll be showing today is new, and not all of you will have access to that functionality in your Qualtrics license. If there's something that we covered today that you are not able to find in your Qualtrics license, we would encourage you to reach out to your Qualtrics account executive or customer success manager, and they can help identify what you need to do to be able to get access to that functionality. Now let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, many of you are familiar with who we are at this point, but for those of you who we have not met yet, it is great to meet you. We are Red Pepper. We are a platinum partner of Qualtrics, and we have been working together with Qualtrics for the last 9 years. In that time, we've helped over 4,500 organizations with their various experience management needs. So we have a lot of experience at this point, a lot of knowledge in the space. And really, you can think of the way that we can support organizations in three kind of pillars. We've got our Qualtrics experts. And so you'll meet Preston, who leads that team today. And I'll introduce him a little bit more in a moment. We've got our advisory team. You'll meet Alicia today. She represents that team. Who, if you need a little bit more of like that strategy on your program design, making sure you're asking the right questions in there. That's where our advisory team can really shine. And then we've got a custom engineering team as well. So really what that means is we've got the full set of resources that can lean in regardless of where you're at with your program's maturity to help you really capitalize on it, get the most out of your program, out of your Qualtrics investment, and be super successful with your experience. So building off of that and a more formal introduction. So Alicia Caballero is one of our CX advisors. She previously has worked at Cisco, Academy Sports, and Walmart. So brings a wealth of knowledge in terms of really making sure that we have the right pieces in place that we're, ultimately we're talking about action today, but to be able to act on data effectively and get those good insights, we've got to be asking the right questions in the beginning. That requires some thoughtfulness, some planning, some effort. So Alicia and her team are great with that. Preston, again, he leads our implementation team. And so they are our experts when it comes to the Qualtrics platform, and they are unparalleled in their knowledge. You'll see that as Preston walks through the demo today. Also, we want to introduce Annie Buncher. So she's one of our strategic account managers. Annie brings a wealth of knowledge in terms of really helping organizations and customers fulfill and get the most out of their customer experience programs. So you'll hear from Annie a little bit later towards the end. So really excited. We've got a great team in place. We're going to pick things back up. For those of you who have been participating in these webinars so far, we've been utilizing Blue River Trail Gear, which is our fictitious customer. Really what we're trying to do is bring this whole thing to life for you. So while we are walking through some of the functionality and maybe strategy behind the program elements, we want to orient that through a story to really kind of make it real for everyone. So we'll be picking back up with our Blue River Trail example. And again, with a focus on taking action on our data and insights. So Alicia, with that, I will kick it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Taylor. As Taylor already alluded to, we're going to be talking about acting today. So we've spent time talking about listening in the first webinar, then we moved on to analyzing, and now today we're going to talk about acting. So there's going to be three ways that we talk about that CX programs can build towards impact. The first is sorry, let's move on to the next slide real quick and I'll go into that one. Yes, so there are going to be 3 ways today that we dig into impact and how we can move from just that insight into ROI. So the first one we'll be talking about today, and Preston will bring to life in the demo shortly, is how to operationalize insights. So a lot of times, unfortunately, insights will get stalled out within dashboards or reports and don't cause action within your organization. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how you can actually apply those findings and operationalize them to improve your customer incomes. Another way that you can help bring impact and ROI is through automation, specifically automating the workflows. We'll talk through some examples where some organizations are doing things manual, and we can go ahead and automate those and trigger escalations to resolve issues faster. And finally, we'll be talking about how you can tie dollars to actions, and we'll investigate how to handle those questions we get sometimes about, tell me about the ROI of your program. All right, Blue River. We're going to pick these guys back up. We've talked about them in the first 2 webinars. And as a reminder, they're an outdoors brand. They sell things like tents and sleeping bags and all the things that you could need to enjoy your time outdoors. What did Blue River do in that first webinar? They improved their surveys, specifically with the conversational feedback and urgency analysis. And then in the next webinar, we talked about how they were able to identify true drivers leveraging Stats IQ, Text IQ, and then Insights Explorer. And now today we're going to be jumping back into Blue River, where they are facing a new challenge. And that challenge is, how has this investment improved the business? So Blue River finds themselves in a situation that probably many of us on the call have experienced at least once, where somewhere up the chain of leadership is wondering, hey, this CX investment here that we made with asking customers about the experience, is it worth it? Right? Should we keep doing it? Is it actually impacting customer outcomes? So Blue River finds themselves in this position where they want to be able to prove out that they are impacting the business. And they also want to do beyond just that. So they had an internal brainstorm, and they wanted to understand, how can we show ROI? You know, one of the initial things they're going to look at shortly is value of satisfaction gains. So if a customer is moving from like a 4 to a 5 and our overall satisfaction is improving, like, is that aligning with business outcomes as well? We also wanted to investigate how closing the loop is impacting customer outcomes. So we know that we figured out a couple ways to identify through sentiment in webinar number 1 and number 2, how we could do some closed loop work. Now we want to know, is that actually impacting the customer satisfaction scores? And then, like we alluded to a little bit on the last slide, we also wanted to figure out that efficiency by automating, is that impacting things as well, right? Or do we have a more um, sorry, is our team efficient? Is it working faster with this in place? So just to sum it up, go back real quick. Just to sum it up, so the need is to connect that CX program improvements that we've made over the past 2 webinars, and let's investigate them and see if we can tie it directly to revenue or efficiency. So Preston will be taking over and diving into the demo.
I will share my screen and we will dive in to the dashboard that we've been looking at over the last from the last webinar into today. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. So let's kind of take a half step back here and discuss, for those that were in our last webinar, a recap. For those that weren't in our last webinar, we found a few insights. Through the open text analytics using Insights Explorer, Text IQ, Stats IQ, we found a few insights that Blue River decided to take some action on. One insight that seemed very correlated to the dip in satisfaction from July, August, and September was that weekends were very, very, very poorly affected by staffing. And so we saw tons of open-ended responses specific to, the speed of checkout, or people weren't able to kind of find what they were looking for. Scrolling down here, we kind of have those metrics that we were looking at, and really understanding, okay, looks like there's definitely staffing issues that people aren't finding what they're looking for because maybe there's not staff available to ask or to help find, or maybe it was in the back room. Different scenario could be widespread. But what we've done here is, let's say Blue River reached out to all of the stores and said, hey, staffing on weekends, let's up it X percentage over the next month, and let's take a look to see what happens with our satisfaction scores. So as we can see here, we do see the jump up from satisfaction of a 3.5 in September back up to kind of a 3.8 where our running average was. Now, a couple of things that we're now tying this to ROI. So great, increasing CSAT. It looks like that was, successful in the fact that we increased staffing. Looking at the open-ended comments, we could verify that comments or trended of comments talking about staffing improved from a sentiment perspective through Text IQ and different widgets there. But also, there's a few more visuals here in this dashboard that weren't here in our last. And we added a new piece of operational data to the responses for the distributions and adding it to the contact list, which was their average basket size or the total purchase that they had at that time post checkout. And what we did here is we trying to create a hypothesis or confirm some hypotheses around, does satisfaction affect the total basket size that someone has in their checkout? And we can see here that there's a direct correlation, or certainly an increase, as we move from extremely and somewhat dissatisfied. The basket, or people are spending more money. So this line chart running through this, so we can see, the options selected specifically from extremely dissatisfied to extremely satisfied on our CSAT question. And we can see how the average of basket size increases as we move across satisfaction. So now we're tying this to the overall trend month over month and finding that from that increase in NPS, we also saw the average basket increase from $120 all the way up to $190. So we saw a significant increase in basket size, which ultimately is where we can tie dollars and cents to the ROI of our Qualtrics program. Something that we'll get into now. Again, this is a simple metric. There could be many different KPIs that you might be tracking specifically from contact center. If we increase satisfaction, are people calling in less? Less call volume maybe affects the amount of staffing required. So all of those different KPIs that are definitely tied to dollars and cents is how we can add that data and then verify our assumptions and our hypotheses around, by doing this or increasing staffing, what does that do to our satisfaction, and how does that actually affect people's spending habits? Okay. So let's talk about this new widget here that's also added, loyalty member basket average. So tying things directly into kind of repeat customers, loyalty customers. Obviously, the most loyal customers are the ones that keep coming back and purchasing more. Typically, obviously, they're going to be on the more high end of satisfaction. But how can we increase loyalty? So, as alluded to from Alicia, let's dive into a workflow that we can add into our survey. So in your survey, you have a workflows tab, and in that workflows tab, there is a plethora of different workflows you have the ability to create. In our first webinar, we kind of talked about closed loop feedback or ticketing as a high level option, but let's dive into this a little bit more and talk about how closing the loop with customers can affect the bottom line. Obviously, there's different stages of closing the loop. Closing the loop is definitely, from a maturity standpoint, you can, those that, hey, I just want an email sent to some high level leadership on every time there's an extremely negative response. Okay. That's typically where a lot start. Getting an email. Now, how actionable is that email? What are people actually doing with that email? How can you report on what actually was done from just getting an email? So that's where a lot start, but this is where a mature program is really benefiting. So ultimately, we are telling Qualtrics to trigger this workflow. For those that aren't, I'll kind of take a half step back. Everything that I'll show here would be in most everyone's Qualtrics account. Today's licenses, very few and in between, do not have kind of ticketing, but we're telling Qualtrics to, when a new response has been recorded, start this workflow. Okay. Now, I'll add this to, you can also import data. So if there's data coming in from Salesforce, if there's data coming in from external data sources, you can create ticketing system, not specific to Qualtrics survey responses, but you can also create tickets based on outside data collected outside of Qualtrics, imported into Qualtrics, and that can trigger these workflows as well. But then we tell Qualtrics to check a condition. So specific to this survey, I've told Qualtrics that if any of the following are true, to create this ticket. So we're really targeting those that might have something specific that we want to follow up with. So I'm telling Qualtrics that, hey, if anyone selected extremely dissatisfied, create a ticket. It needs follow-up if someone's selected extremely dissatisfied. Otherwise, maybe they selected neutral, or maybe they selected somewhat dissatisfied, or even somewhat satisfied. In their open-ended comment, I'm telling Qualtrics to say, hey, check the emotion of their open-ended comment. And again, from previous webinars, we can get more data out of the open-ended comment by the conversational feedback tool and those types of things. And so if the emotion contains anger, or if the emotion contains disappointment, then we want to trigger this ticket regardless of if they selected extremely dissatisfied. Those that are satisfied, that showed somewhat anger, that goes a long way to reach out. Now, there's other types of, emotions or sentiment. We can look at effort if the kind of key is specific to effort, maybe on a website, different things like that. So emotion intensity, high, low. But if this condition is met, we're telling Qualtrics to create a ticket. Now, from an operational standpoint, one of the biggest challenges with closing the loop is the process on who's actually going to be actioning on these tickets. Creating that process. Is it a single group that's actioning on every location's tickets? Is it the branch manager or the assistant branch manager, or a couple of individuals specific to the branch? Now, getting that dynamic assignment certainly improves the response time and the ability to contact these customers quickly. Because again, if you're not contacting them quickly to try and resolve issues, it's better sometimes not to do it at all. Closed loop follow-up done correctly definitely has ties to increased loyalty, increased satisfaction over time. And that's kind of where we're going to try and tie this into with our loyalty. Okay. So coming in from here, we can see that I'm creating this ticket, the name of the ticket, post-purchase follow-up. I'm assigning it to a default owner. Now I'm pulling in specific information, the CSAT score, the open-ended comment, what location it came from, if they were a loyalty member or not, all of the driver questions and how they answered them, and then dynamically assigning using a variable called QTicketOwner. This allows for us to dynamically assign tickets out to, again, a group of specific people at a branch instead of one person getting all the tickets for everything. Okay. Also, there's the ability here to create an actual survey inside of the ticket. So the individual acting on the ticket can fill out, a survey that might indicate, what was the overall sentiment of. I'll kind of pull this up so that we can all see it. But this feature allows for additional reporting on how successful our ticketing is. Okay. What immediate action did you take? Was the issue fully resolved? What was the primary root cause of this issue? Was corrective or preventive actions implemented to avoid reoccurrence? So this allows the branches, locations to really see a trend now. Now we have a dashboard that we can build, similar to what we're doing with the response data of the customer survey. We can build a similar dashboard that's allowing executives, branch managers, executives to really look at, what is the quantity of tickets coming in? What are the root causes of these tickets to really drill into? Well, we see most of these are coming in from a process or policy gap or employee behavior, which is something we can absolutely take action on, giving us that data. And then from what it visually looks like is a very clean, simple view of all of the tickets created with the ability to click in, manage the status, marking it in progress, creating custom statuses. There's the ability to create SLAs. So if something doesn't get followed up or taken care of in 48 hours, you're able to escalate this to another executive or someone else to have insight into, out of SLA tickets. We have the ability to see how they responded to the survey, action on this, and actually send an email directly to the customer from the ticket. Okay. In addition to any customer information we might have on an email follow-up, or they requested maybe a phone call and provided their phone number. Okay, so taking action on these closed loop tickets will allow us to create additional reporting to then tie in, how is our loyalty membership changing month over month? We can see that loyalty has an effect on the dollars and cents again, but how can we increase this loyalty? Again, closed loop follow-up there's an absolute tie to, loyalty, creating semi-loyal customers more loyal, and those that had a terrible experience. Sure, many of you have had a terrible customer experience. Something manager rectifies the situation, and you're much more inclined to go spend your money there again. Okay, so that quick, actionable follow-up. Okay, so that's ultimately the demo I had for today. I'll kind of turn the time back over to Alicia at this point.
All right. Just waiting for those slides to come back up. While we're waiting on the slides, I just wanted to call out to the audience. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop those into the Q&A, and when we get there shortly, we can move on to those. Brooklyn, did we have there we go. All right, thank you. All right, so that was a wonderful demo. Thank you, Preston. So hopefully you all saw how that exciting some of that was and how it can drive impact. So to summarize things up, there were the 3 ways that we were investigating how we could show impact and drive further impact. And the first one was just understanding is getting customers up that scale to fully satisfied, related to or driving increased basket size, and we did see a relationship. The next thing that, one of the other things that we looked at was, does closing the loop help us out? And so we did see that closing the loop to turn some at-risk customers into loyal, which we know will drive long-term spend. And then finally, the third theme that we were investigating was automating workflows. So again, those sentiment-driven triggers ensured that nothing is slipping through the cracks, and doing it in a much more efficient manner. All right, I think we are gonna move to Q&A now. Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, just before we get to the Q&A, we love feedback. And so for those of you who have joined us today, we would love to hear from you. So feel free to take this survey. We always want to improve, we want to get better. If there's other content that would be interesting in the future for you to hear about, we want to provide value to you and we want to continue to improve. So please take a moment to scan this QR code at the end. After the Q&A, we'll also have a slide up that has the QR code for you to take the survey. So in addition, we will be sending out the deck and the recording of this webinar a little bit later this afternoon so that you can have access to that content ongoing. Real quick, before we go to the Q&A, wanted to let you know if anything you've heard resonates with you. If you're sitting there saying, hey, would love a little bit of one-on-one time to walk through and understand some of these features better, would love to get some additional training, or maybe your bandwidth is really limited and you want to have another resource to become an extension of your team, maybe you want to tap into our advisors for some strategy and design to take that next step in your program. We offer success packages. These come in different levels so that, if you can see there at the entry level, as low as $3,900 to be able to get that one-to-one access, you get a dedicated point of contact here at Red Pepper, who'll get to know you, your program, work alongside with you, and then things scale up from there. So we're here as an ongoing resource and support. As I mentioned in the beginning, we've got a ton of expertise. Love to share that with you if it's something that would be helpful. With that, let's go ahead and transition into the Q&A portion of the webinar. So we've got a couple of questions here. And if anyone, participating who hasn't entered your questions yet, please feel free to do so in the Q&A portion. You can find that down at the bottom of the Zoom meeting. All right, so the first question, if you have tickets coming in from every branch, where does the connection assignment between the submission and the branch happen? How is it routed to the right branch?
Yeah, great question. So typically where this is done is in the metadata of the respondent's kind of embedded data. So if we upload a list of data into Qualtrics, obviously we have their first name, their last name, and their email address. But in addition to that, we can add other metadata associated to, what we're looking to tie to their response. One of those being maybe the branch they visited, the location they visited, the supervisor that is at that branch. So it's tying data specific to the contact as well as operational data that you might have on the location they made that purchase. So pulling from, whatever system is tracking purchases or contact center, different scenarios there, but tying that to the contact list that is uploaded into Qualtrics gives us the ability to tie if branch equals X, location is this, and dynamically assign it to that location. So mostly done from an embedded data field added to the contact. Now there are a couple other ways, but that's by far the most common way of doing it.
Okay, Preston, and piggybacking off of that, maybe related, is there a way to tie back like the information from the ticket to the customer profile within Qualtrics, maybe for getting more historic context for someone who might be working the ticket, et cetera?
Yeah, so all that ticket data does, the answer is yes. You can create a workflow that updates a contact in the Qualtrics directory based off ticket information. So you could create a transaction technically on a contact based on the tickets that they've created. Very common as well, information. Others, and I didn't really mention this in the meeting or in the demo, but a lot of other customers use different ticketing tools. Zendesk, HubSpot, Salesforce is an extremely common one. So it doesn't have to be done in Qualtrics. If you have a flow or individuals already in kind of Salesforce, we can push this data to records in Salesforce, create cases in Zendesk. But yes, we can definitely tie the ticketing information to the contact in Qualtrics as well.
Great. Okay. Is there a way to have Qualtrics pull location information? So for example, if someone filled out the survey and being able to associate it with like a street location of a store, for example.
It's a good question. Qualtrics can pull in geo IP location. So it can be their GeoIP location from like a state perspective. It doesn't necessarily pull in city, it kind of stops at state. Um, so there's would be more workarounds or things you'd have to do if you weren't adding that information directly to like a contact list. I will mention if you want to kind of Google search this, if you're using like an anonymous link, like a QR code at a specific location, there's something called query strings. So if you just Google search Qualtrics query strings, you can then create dynamic QR codes for each location, and then pull in information that you append to the end of a URL by creating custom links or QR codes based on adding query strings that you don't need to pull in any information, because sometimes GeoIP location, if they have things hiding those, then it might be brought in incorrectly. But query strings are a common one if you want to use an anonymous link or a QR code.
Right. And Alicia, this one might be more for you, but what is a reasonable expectation? So if you're working with leadership, and they're wanting to see results, once we start running, once we're closing the loop, like what's a reasonable time frame to communicate back to them for when we can start to see an impact on some of the data that's coming in?
Yeah. Um, I think it really depends on what exactly we're looking at, right? So it depends on if we're measuring something that was consistently changed across all stores, if we had a pre-period and now we're looking at a post-period. But I would say that you definitely want to have a plan going into it. That's always a great first step, is when you're launching something, think through how you want to measure it after the fact. But let's say you didn't have time to measure it. I would sit down and look at all those different factors we were just talking about, look at locations, etc., and kind of see if you can't backward engineer a pre-post, and that will guide you into how long you need to get to the right sample count.
Great. The next question, in the workflow under decisions, was branch there pulling from the metadata originating in the contact list for the distribution?
Yeah, I think if I'm interpreting your question correctly, what the branch in the workflow is doing, this is somewhat of a newer feature. It's been kind of publicly pushed out to most accounts at this point. But the branch is the ability to, in our example, we said if that decision is met, then create that ticket. So it goes event, decision, task. That's kind of how a workflow runs. And so the event is when a response is recorded. The decision is if those conditions were met. And inside of that decision, we can say branch. So instead of just ending there, if that decision didn't get met or that condition didn't get met, we can have it check a different, completely separate condition to then complete a different task. So our task is that creating the ticket and assigning it dynamically to a branch or location, where we could say, well, if it wasn't one of those, check to see if there was a different condition, and if that condition is met, then go ahead and create some other task, or just send an email or something. So the branch is more of similar to branch logic inside of like a survey flow. The ability to say, if this condition isn't met, try this other separate condition and then create a separate task if needed. So it isn't necessarily directly tied to contact information. But we could say if that condition isn't met, then update a contact if these other conditions are met. So that's what the branch does in the decision.
Okay. This one I think is for you as well, Preston. What are some of the ways that you see organizations bringing in operational data? So if they've got data from other systems, how can that get brought into Qualtrics?
Yeah, there's two main ways. One way, as I kind of referenced before, is information that's specifically coming on the contact list. So for example, if there's operational data such as if we're talking, post-purchase, the total purchase size, if there's other information specific to the purchase, but you can also tie other types of information. So one is the contact list, and the other is by creating an automated import of data into Qualtrics. So there's workflows that you can create that pull information from Salesforce, that pull information from an SFTP server. So you can create an automated export of data out of some system, your data lake, wherever, into a server that Qualtrics grabs it and ingests it, and then imports that as a row of data in what's called an imported data project. So that's found in most accounts as well, but inside of an imported data project. And then there's options to kind of tie that operational data. You could create a dashboard in Qualtrics specific to that operational data and just say, well, how are our, you know, monthly trends? Most organizations have monthly sales trends reports and dashboards outside of Qualtrics, but you could build it in Qualtrics. And then from there, there is the ability to kind of a new way of creating dashboards is called the data modeler. That is, there's also documentation if you Google Qualtrics dashboards data modeler on how you can do a lookup or a really might use a technical term here, but it's doing a SQL join of data sets. So you can join data sets in this data modeler that would allow you to join operational data that you're importing and tie it to response data that is coming from Qualtrics. So that is another way of doing it as well, but those are the most two common ways.
Yeah. Very good. Well, appreciate everyone's questions. Before we wrap up, Annie, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to quickly introduce yourself to everyone.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Annie. I'm the strategic account executive. I just wanted to let you guys know to keep an eye out. I will be sending you guys an email. That way we can continue this conversation and answer any questions that you may have. I look forward to connecting with you and working closely with you guys as well.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate it.